All right, so I'll share my screen here, and guys, a lot of this, or frankly, all of this is part of what I presented for an ARL perspective as well, because I think, honestly, one of the biggest things that we do in the amateur radio community is the Weather Service's Skywarn program, especially here in New England and the Northeast. It's really honestly, from an Aries perspective up here in the Northeast, it is the number one function that we provide, and it's the number one function here in Massachusetts. I could tell you it's the number one function that Massachusetts emergency management relies on from the amateur radio community to deliver is reports during major storms and even localized storms of all kinds. And so I'm going to take everybody through Skywarn, and I'm going to talk a little bit too about how we've adapted, especially our training processes to adjust to COVID, because we would generally have classroom type spotter classes, especially here in the Northeast and as well as other parts of the country. And obviously COVID has changed a lot of that, and I can explain what our office has done. So what is Skywarn? It's the National Weather Service's volunteer weather spotting program where timely severe weather reporting to the Weather Service helps with the protection of life and property. At our office at the Weather Service, Boston, Norton, Massachusetts, it is an Aries function. In other areas, it could involve RACES, it could involve emergency management more directly. It just depends on the area. And the Skywarn training sessions, they're really now about 2 to 2.5 hour sessions. We've done them in the spring through fall of each year. And as I mentioned, we would typically do them in classroom type settings, which we haven't been able to do because of COVID. So our Weather Service office initially was going to do the presentation, but not have anyone become spotters because they were concerned about just doing the presentation online. And I was very concerned about that because we have a lot of interested folks, and I think a lot of good people that want to get their spotter number. We issue spotter numbers at our Weather Service. Other Weather Service offices do not. I think at our office, it's been good to have the spotter ID. It allows us to track general public reports versus someone who's been trained through the training program. And we do find that folks that are trained are generally more reliable than those that aren't. And that's not a slate on those that are enthusiasts that are reporting. It's just those that are trained know that much more of what we're looking for. So what we did working with our Weather Service office, because we have a very strong longstanding relationship, was we said, well, for online, we did allow folks to renew their spotter ID, so to speak. So every 5 years, we asked folks to get retrained, and we had an online curriculum and a 5-question quiz. We says, well, if we're going to open it and have people do it online and get their spotter certification, we'll make it a 20-question quiz on the material, a little bit more to go through, and that sort of helps us know that they were paying attention throughout the presentation. And that's worked very well for us. We had at one point, we had over 700 people actually register as a spotter, take the quiz and pass it. And that's roughly what we would do, I think, in a given year with live classes. And we only ran 3 sessions with the Weather Service, and we ran 1 for our New England Aries Academy. So, so I think it's worked out really well, and it's allowed us to continue to grow the program and grow spotters. And I just happen to have a meeting today over Google Meet with our local office planning this year's training cycle. And we plan to have actually a couple more. We may have like 4 or 5 online seminars, a few on weeknights, and a couple Saturdays to accommodate folks at different schedules. And hopefully we'll get a similar or greater number of spotters. You don't need to be an amateur radio operator to become a spotter, but we're always pushing to have folks in the amateur community get licensed, of course. And also it's a good outlet for, if we have spotters that aren't amateur radio operators, that's kind of a good growth group for us to grab new people into Skywarn. So, wanted to make that avenue. That's a growth opportunity for amateur radio to get folks in who are not operators through the Skywarn program. And spotters have varying activity levels. I mean, some will be more avid about when storms go through, go out and try and check the areas for damage. Most just report conditions in their, across their daily lives, going from, going to home from work, going to work, doing anything in their given day. Obviously, with COVID, a lot of folks may just be spotting from home. And the hope is that we get all trained spotters to report in during severe weather events. And you'd be surprised how a report that you may not think is all that significant could be very significant in the ability for the Weather Service to forecast, maybe adjust warnings and such accordingly, and also verify what's happened after the fact. This is our amateur radio station at the Weather Service Boston Norton. It was used all but once last year because of COVID. We actually didn't have any activity that warranted an activation in the office before the pandemic hit. However, for Skywarn Recognition Day, our warning coordination meteorologist, Glenn Field, KB1GHX, did operate the station. And this year with SRD, for the first time since 2003, we had a winter storm in our area. So we had Skywarn active, getting snowfall reports and some damage reports because we had some strong winds, as well as some issues with flooding and wet snow damage. And we actually had Glenn on the air on a couple local repeaters, gathering reports and thanking spotters simultaneously. So our station was not to be silenced due to COVID, thanks to the fact that we have our warning coordination meteorologist as a amateur radio operator. And he got his license because of what we do for the Weather Service. So just, a great testament to what can happen when you build the right relationship with an agency. So amateur operators, we encourage how you can help. You can have folks take the Skywarn training class. A lot of times, checking into a net, just give your call sign, name, location, and if you're able to go out and look at damage areas, again, without getting in the way of public safety, volunteer as a net control station. We encourage folks, if you don't have weather conditions of criteria to report, just check in with your location and monitor. Don't give a sunny sky report, so to speak. I know we've had that problem here in the past, not as much because I think we've been constantly training and putting the presence and putting out what we're looking for in terms of criteria to folks. So that's been helpful. We have, of course, many hams that work in public safety, and we encourage them to relay reports in via amateur radio. And we have our own networks of family and friends, and sometimes on one side of town, there may be not much happening, but on the other side of town, that's where the golf ball size hail is. That's where the microburst is occurring, or even a tornado, and getting some information to help understand what's going on from a situational awareness perspective is very helpful. And if you're not a trained spotter, ask the net control for the reporting criteria, again, so that you're not giving that sunny skies report. Another thing that we're very aggressive with here in Southern New England is the ability to monitor public safety for damage reports. It needs to be done properly. You get the dispatch, and then the unit on scene could see nothing, or they could see way more than what was initially reported. But we gather a lot of information this way, and it's a powerful tool to kind of build out areas of damage that may need to be investigated later if we're talking a severe thunderstorm or tornado situation, or it tells us where the strongest winds are in a more general storm situation, or for icing damage or wet snow damage, and so forth. And it's really helpful to gather information because, at least here in New England, and it may be different in other parts of the country, public safety are so busy dealing with the incident, they don't have the cycles, or they do, but hours later, to report what's really happening in their area. So they will, our ability to get that information into the Weather Service's hands sooner, it can speed up damage surveys. It can speed up the ability to assess the damage areas. Sometimes we've been able to send amateur operators out and look at the damage areas and document it, so make it easier for the forecaster to get to the area and assess what's happening. And I'll talk about a few examples of that. So this is a powerful tool, and it's right along the lines of the ARRL, the R that stands for relay, relaying good information in from a public safety perspective. Another example also is the hundreds of online weather stations that are out there. There's a lot of good information there that can be critical, especially when we're looking for things in those more localized areas. A lot of times you might get a weather station that's right over an area that's getting 3 inches an hour of rain accumulated and so forth. And that can be a powerful tool in saying what's happening in a localized area. And then of course you can use those networks to kind of build what's happening for precipitation and winds and such over a larger scale area. Certainly social media monitoring. We have a amateur radio Facebook page for our amateur radio station at the Weather Service Boston Norton, WX1BOX. We also have a Twitter feed. We've been working with some groups that have their own Facebook and Twitter feeds, such as Weather in Rhode Island. Weather in Connecticut has actually turned into Weather in Southern New England. Facebook and Twitter they're just modern forms of social media, and amateur radio is the original form of social media. The inventors of social media, as former FEMA Director Craig Fugate has put toward us. So us being able to get on social media, monitor it, is another way that we can help gather information for situational awareness, gather spotter reports for Skywarn. Many police and fire departments are on Twitter and Facebook, and I can tell you we've at times interfaced with them on Twitter and Facebook to gather information, utilize pictures with credit to their departments, and that's been another way we can gather information and get it ahead of time to the Weather Service. So now I'm going to walk through some examples, and I have some New England examples, and then from my role in the VoIP hurricane net, I have examples from other parts of the country during hurricanes, and I'm sure there's many others. So this was July 22nd, 2020, and this is the West Brookfield Fire Department. Good fire department, good people associated with it. It's likely a volunteer fire department. This is their post: tornado sighting and where. Tornado has appeared to have passed us by. West Brookfield Fire Department member did observe confirmed sighting of tornado, and they're manning their station. Well, luckily for us, we had several amateur radio spotters and now a former assistant Skywarn coordinator for Western Mass in that same town at that time. We immediately got a hold of them, had them check out the areas. Didn't really find any significant damage. We did find some isolated tree damage, but nothing significant, nothing with a defined path. An amateur radio operator who works for the Mass State Police Telecommunications Division, who actually pinged me and said, "Are you getting any reports of tornadic activity?" I says, "Well, there's this report from the fire department, but about a sighting and where, but other than some spotty tree damage, I don't have much to report." I says, "What are you hearing on your end?" And he explained what the state police was doing because of this sighting report, and checked in with his contacts, and we found some more pockets, isolated pockets of wind damage, but no defined tornado path. So actually our role as in our amateur radio Skywarn network was to tell everybody no tornado has been sighted. There was some spotty wind damage indicative of a severe thunderstorm, but whatever and there was a circulation of interest with this storm, but it just never made it all the way to the ground. This was an example of getting this observation and actually having to say, well, it doesn't look like that's the case. Could have even been a funnel cloud, but the circulation never made it to the ground to cause more significant damage. This is an example of our network actually giving more insight into the reporting that was different from what actually happened or what actually was reported, in this case from a fire department. And again, no fault of the fire department. They're not trying to hype things up. They just didn't thought they had something on the ground that just never made it fully to the ground. This was different though on August 2nd. So this ended up being an EF0 tornado in Tallinn, Massachusetts. For those that don't know Tallinn, Massachusetts, this is a community of maybe 300 or 400 people. And this is a photo. This was just part of the path of damage in Tallinn. But as you can see, it's not a very populated area. Now it did cross a few roads, and we did get reports from monitoring public safety of tree damage in these areas. The type of signature on the radar was tornadic. So we did have a couple amateurs. By the point this storm had hit and passed, it ended up being nightfall, but we did get some photos at night from N1LWS, Larry Spencer, and a couple of other spotters on Twitter of some of the damage in Tallinn. And then the next morning, we had another amateur operator who had a drone and was able to kind of find this path and then found this additional damage here along this pond in Tallinn, Massachusetts. Meantime, our warning coordination meteorologist was out to do the survey, and this storm originated in Berkshire County, which is in Albany, New York's area, but Albany, New York office gave Glenn the approval to do the whole survey, including the part that was in their area, because it was pretty close to our coverage area. So he looked at Sandusfield and then came to Tallinn, and you'll see the results. They had met him there, and you see the note that Glenn Field, our WCM, wrote to Adam about how he found all the damaged spots, especially along this pond. He had an issue with his drone that might cost him some money, and then waiting for him to arrive to look at the again, unpaved back roads and potholes, etc., and found without his efforts, he wouldn't have found the spots. It would have taken much longer to get a survey out, and we probably saved numerous hours of work. And this part of Massachusetts, from where our weather office is a good 3 hours away. So this is the type of benefit that we can provide as amateur operators and Skywarn spotters, both during the event and after the event has happened. Tropical storm Isaias. So we do get tropical systems in New England. We are still waiting for a landfalling hurricane to come back up through New England, the New England area. Irene back in 2011 weakened to a tropical storm when it got to our area. Isaias made a landfall in North Carolina as a hurricane and then came up through New England. And when it did, it caused, it was tropical storm force conditions. And these was kind of the damage photos that we got. This was from Wethersfield, Connecticut, from an amateur radio operator who's also on the fire department there. And this was from Northampton, Massachusetts, an amateur radio operator with a friend there that had this damage, a tree through a home here. So we had numerous reports of this kind of damage, trees through houses, many trees and wires down, even some direct structural damage like you see here in the Wethersfield case. I mean, we had wind gusts to hurricane force in some areas, 74 miles an hour in Hampton, Connecticut, 70 miles an hour in Milford, Connecticut, and many wind gusts over 60 miles an hour. Much of the damage was in Western Mass and Connecticut and Rhode Island, but there was some damage in Eastern Mass as well. What happens with our tropical systems is that they will get the heavy rain side to the west with the damaging wind side to the east, and also the threat for severe weather. So we had very little rain, but very strong winds. We did have several tornado warnings, but in a lot of those cases, they were also, those circulations were also embedded with strong straight line winds as well. So didn't have any defined touchdowns here, but a lot of this information we passed on to our weather service office, we passed out over social media and through email and other outlets, and also to the American Red Cross. So this was from Rosty, who's also an amateur radio operator, and we gave him our amateur radio logs of reports, pointed him to the Weather Service's local storm reports and public information statements for weather data and damage. And he also mentioned how he was extracting reports of the structural damage. And we forwarded to Rosty numerous pictures from amateur radio operators of damage, trees on houses, direct structural damage to homes that was factored into the Red Cross damage assessment for Isaias. You know, this was a top 5 power outage event for the state of Connecticut. So something that was very potent for our area, and how we're able to give information not only to the Weather Service, but to other agencies that were looking for this information. And while this wasn't what they had out in Iowa back in the summertime, we did have a derecho event here in the Northeast United States. And what is a derecho, for those that don't know? Well, that's Spanish for big wind, and it's when you get a complex of severe thunderstorms that track over an area of 240 miles or longer. In our case, this started in New York State. And we had straight line wind gusts anywhere between 40 and up to 85 miles an hour. And that's just the wind gusts that were recorded by various weather stations. The derecho also caused an EF0 tornado in Millis, Massachusetts. Our amateur radio networks were completely jammed with damage reports. We got basically in some areas the equivalent of damage for Tropical Storm Isaias, but happening in a much shorter period of time. The power outages in Massachusetts rivaled Tropical Storm Isaias. That's how potent this event was. And it took several days, but the Storm Prediction Center did classify this event as a derecho. The picture here that's actually reversed, the top picture actually is from me here, and that's literally 2 houses away from my house. This big tree came down in front of a home on my street in New Bedford. I can tell you I had just put up a couple of dipole HF antennas with the help of a couple local hams in my Aries leadership team, and thankfully they stayed up. My weather station measured a wind gust over 40 miles an hour, I think, or was right at 40 miles an hour, and I am sheltered in the direction the winds were coming from. Another amateur radio station, weather station in New Bedford, which is where I live in Massachusetts, had a 61 mile an hour wind gust when this derecho came through. So just an example of another event and another way where our nets helped to determine the extent of damage and were a factor in classifying this event as a derecho. You know, we actually have had tornado warnings on Cape Cod here in New England. This one was actually in November. And I leave this graphic in. It's a little bit small here, but you'll see that in the text there, I left it up here because it says snow reported in Pittsfield, Mass. Meantime, we got tornado warnings going up on Cape Cod. Welcome to how things work here in New England. This is a funnel cloud sighting in Aquina, Massachusetts, right here in this photo. This radar image kind of shows how this was a much tighter circulation here. It kind of broadens out as it got onto Cape Cod. We had minimal damage, you know, a few isolated tree down reports. This funnel cloud here in Aquina, which never made it to the ground, and Aquina is on Martha's Vineyard. Wind gusts were between 35 and 65 miles an hour. So that was what we had. Didn't turn out to be a serious situation. Now I could tell you just a little over a year prior on Cape Cod, we did have a serious situation with multiple tornadoes on the ground and hurricane force wind gusts. And I'll talk about that a little bit here in a moment. But here we were interviewed by Fox 25 in Boston as this event was unfolding. We were able to give some of the weather station information that we had, some of the information coming in from amateur radio Skywarn spotters, and explain how the process works, what spotters are doing, what amateur radio operators are doing, and how we're trying to figure out, will this circulation make it to the ground or not? And it turned out in this case that it didn't. On July 23rd, 2019, it sure did. And we had wind gusts here. Notice the magnitude difference, 91 miles an hour for recorded wind gusts. Some weather stations were knocked offline before the highest gust could be measured. Either they lost, generally because they lost power. We had a local Skywarn net active, and the reports coming in were continuous. And then our Cape Cod Aries DEC, Frank O'Laughlin, had amateur operators go out and photograph and get damage photos, and we have several hundred from this event. These are just a couple here. This was at a post office in Yarmouth. This top corner picture here was from Harwich, Massachusetts. Aries then kind of pivoted with the Barnstable County MAC, the Multi-Agency Coordination Center getting active, and a couple of shelters getting active, and they assisted with regional shelter logistical traffic. 6 amateur operators supported that operation, and I would say over 24 kind of supported the documenting of the damage over the area. There were over 50,000 without power on Cape Cod from this incident. Again, a couple more photos from Yarmouth and the windows blown out here at the post office. Other significant damage reports were from Chatham, Dennis, Mashpee, Brewster, and Orleans, all on the Cape, as well as a couple of towns on Martha's Vineyard. To give you the extent of the damage at the Chatham Regional Airport, there were a couple of planes, small Cessna planes that were flipped over by the winds. So this was a significant event, and amateur radio played a critical part. And also during this event, we were interviewed by Fox 25, not once, but twice. Once during the event and once on the 6 o'clock news to describe and kind of give a follow-up wrap-up of what we do, how we do it, how we have the National Memorandum of Understanding between the Weather Service and the ARRL. So really good PR out of this for the work that was done, and a very significant event. We effectively doubled the amount of recorded tornadoes in one day on Cape Cod from this incident. Now, records only go back to 1950, but that gives you an idea of things. And then, of course, we have the hurricane net and kind of what we do there from a Skywarn perspective, gathering the local reports and getting them into WX4NHC, the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center, where the information is at times posted in National Hurricane Center advisories. So this is Hurricane Florence, was a strong Category 4 that weakened to a Category 1, but turned into a huge flood problem, both from the heavy rainfall and also coastal flooding, as well as wind damage reports. These are a couple of photos from Chuck Taylor, KF4ESH, and from Hurricane Florence on flooding. We also had reports, from amateur operators here in my own section who had, for example, their sons, in one case they had their son in the military down in North Carolina. Got a report from that part of North Carolina that was affected from his son. He passed it on to our net. We then submitted it out to the Hurricane Center. Just an example of how you can, even when you're not in the area, but you have people you know in the area, that information can be pulled in and sent up the chain. In this incident, we even had a case where a couple amateurs from outside the area were relaying people that needed water rescues in parts of North Carolina that received the worst flooding. We even called their dispatch centers, and their dispatch centers were actually happy to hear from us because their list was very long, and that sometimes they were getting to places and the people had already gotten out. Getting a couple calls on additional calls on people that were still stuck helped them prioritize who they should get to first. So this is also a case where amateur radio likely saved some lives. And then there was Hurricane Michael, and to give you an idea, sometimes you come on the VoIP Hurricane Net and it's extremely quiet. Well, why is that? Well, when you have something like Hurricane Michael, which is a Category 5 hurricane, this is like having an EF3 to EF4 tornado, but covering maybe a radius of 25 to 30 miles wide in the terms of the kind of winds that it can produce. So at that point, people really need to be sheltering probably underground or probably in an interior room on the lowest floor. Nonetheless, we still get reports. And this was an example here. We were getting some reports from a weather station, N1HQ Jack in the Florida Panhandle. And I asked, well, could you give us your summary of data once you get your power back and stuff? He said, I'd love to do that, but my weather station was destroyed, and this is what happened to his weather station and his amateur radio tower. Notice some of the other damage here in his area. Luckily, his home Looks like it has some superficial damage, but otherwise in okay shape. But this is the kind of serious damage you get from some of these major hurricanes. And also, this is how we can collect data during those major incidents. And then this is more damage photos. This came from Dennis Dura, K2DCD, who's one of our assistant directors of operation for the VoIP Hurricane Net. And, notice here, there's nothing left of this forest here. Some buildings are completely flattened. Some lost roofs, some are completely flattened. When it gets this significant for damage, that's why nets sometimes go very quiet, because they're at that point you're taking cover and trying to stay out of the worst of it. And if people are able to report in after it's safe to do so, they may, or they may not have the ability to do that at least right away because of the type of damage that's occurring here. And yes, the Booz Express, it's bad when the Booz Express gets hit with this tornadic activity. And then, the last example is from Hurricane Laura from last year, and this is one of my favorites as an example. There happened to be a weather station that was online at the Lake Charles, Louisiana EOC, and it recorded a 137-mile-an-hour wind gust before we didn't see any wind gusts from the station anymore. And this was right near the time the airport had a 133-mile-an-hour wind gust. And what we found is 2 hours later, one of the Weather Service meteorologists gave that report out, and we had given it to both the Hurricane Center and to the local office. And then we saw that same report 2 hours later. We quickly jumped in and said, it's the same station. We monitored it online. Turns out there was a meteorologist there on site, but he didn't get that report until about 2 hours later. And we told them it was the same report. This is how they were appreciative that we told them it was from the same station, and they understood that it happened, and we were able to get it to them quicker because we're focusing on that. We're monitoring that. The meteorologist, he's trying to look at that, but he's also trying to forecast what the next 2 to 3 up to 12, 24 hours is looking like, to help give decision support and so forth. And we're focused on the actual reporting and saying, here's what's happening right in near real time of what's going on. And that pulls in important data that has, this is the example here that wasn't found out until 2 hours later. And then you see some of the damage here, and I notice this photo got cut off here on the lower right-hand corner, but this was to show the Doppler radar at Lake Charles that was destroyed and was rebuilt and put back in service, I believe, towards the end of last year, similar to what happened at the San Juan office. And then even in snowstorms, amateur radio Skywarn spotter reports can be very critical. So see this here on the radar, this is a very heavy band of snow. And what would happen is this band was dumping snowfall rates as high as 3.5 inches per hour. But this is a fairly localized area. It's about a 50-mile wide band, and it kind of sat there for a couple of hours. Well, a couple of additional hours of that kind of high rate snowfall rate is going to cause more snow than forecasted to occur. So reports under this heavy band were very critical because it allowed the Weather Service to kind of upscale these areas that were under winter weather advisories to winter storm warnings and get the word out that this band was significant. It was going to cause heavier snowfall. The band would eventually start moving and kind of move more swiftly east after it hit these areas. But the ground truth that we gave them was critical in telling them we have to upshift to warnings because of the situation. So just some examples of, even in winter situations, it makes a difference to get these reports in. Finally, I mentioned SRD. I mentioned earlier what we did from an operations perspective. Well, this is an example here. So Jim Cantori and I have worked together quite a bit in the last 10 years on, first it was just storms in New England, and then in 2017 with the hurricanes, it says, well, we get reports from the Hurricane Net if you'd like to have them. And he said, sure. And sure enough, that's become a very important part of what Jim covers during events, and he can actually talk about what's really happening on the ground, not have to just rely on radar and other data. And you can see here, thank you to all the Skywarn spotters. The work people do is valuable to our weather enterprise, and he retweeted a Skywarn Recognition Day post, and this is our warning coordination meteorologist at our ham station at the Weather Service. So, you know, SRD, first of all, it's a great event to recognize spotters, recognize folks that come and operate at the Weather Service offices. I don't know if we'll get a chance to do that this year or if it'll still be restricted, but it's a very good event. It allows for more contact. Some NWS offices were on the air with employees, and it worked out really well. And it's an opportunity for participation and fun, and also recognition from folks that do the work and do the reporting in Skywarn and spotting over the years. These are a bunch of resources on Skywarn. I have the weather.gov/Skywarn page, the amateur radio station at the Hurricane Center, the Hurricane WatchNet, which has been around for the longest of all the operations for different hurricanes. You can check out their website for information on the HF nets that have been in existence since 1965. I mentioned the VoIP Hurricane Net that I help operate, voipwx.net. And then these are our resources to our amateur radio station at the Weather Service Boston, WX1BOX. You see our homepage and Facebook and Twitter feeds. So I want to thank folks out there that support Skywarn, Aries, and public service. It definitely makes a difference to the amateur radio service and the community. And it's really our way to have that foot in the door with the agencies and working together with them on a more regular basis, such that when we start really losing communications and so forth, those relationships are established, and we're kind of plugging in and playing in those situations sooner versus waiting for those situations to happen and then getting put to use at that time. That's, I think, the biggest thing that Skywarn brings to the table. Most, if not all, parts of the country get some form of severe weather at one point or another. So it's a great way to kind of get involved and get working in sort of a Aries way with nets, with various ways to report information, and also relay and coalesce information and vet them to help agencies during weather events. And that applies in a lot of other areas. I saw the recent articles on the SEC Aries list about information during earthquakes and giving those reports into the United States Geological Survey. We actually had a local small, nothing nearly close to what they get in California, earthquake right in my hometown of New Bedford. It was about 3 miles south. It was actually slightly over the water. It was definitely the strongest quake I had ever felt, because I had not lived in California or anything. But we did even have some minor damage from it to a couple of homes right along the chimney stack furnace areas. And there were police and fire were running around for a while in New Bedford and a few of the surrounding communities around gas leaks. They turned out mostly to be nothing except for a couple of homes that were damaged. But the earthquake scenario in the articles I saw there, that's another great way we can contribute. And I think kudos to the hams in California on that article and the work that they do there. And that's another great example of how we can get involved in that sense, and then be ready to help agencies with communications should they need them and they fail as well. So that's my presentation for tonight, and I'm ready for questions.
All right. Barry, you want to pick up?
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Okay, one comment. A lot of the forecast offices are now doing online Skywarn classes, like you said. Some of them are using this organization called meted.org, which has a 2-part training course, and they're accepting that for their Skywarn courses. I know down in Miami, they're going to actually be starting to do online Skywarn courses also. So a lot of the forecast offices are starting to do that, realizing that they need the spotters, they need to refresh the training, and they're not going to be able to do it in person. Someone also asked, can you give an example of a report that the spotter would not think is significant, meaning not meeting SWR criteria, severe criteria, but the NWS would think is significant?
Well, so in our office, we have severe criteria and we have reportable criteria. So we will very often have, for example, many reports of hail under 1 inch in diameter, which is a severe threshold, but you know, could be as small as pea size or up through, you know, dime, penny, and nickel size. And that's still information that's important, because that could be, you know, if you have nickel size hail over here, I could be having golf ball size hail over there. And there's a number of examples where those reports have been important. Even too with wind gusts, you know, I gave you an example. My house, I had a 40-mile-an-hour wind gust. Clearly there were stronger winds because I had a big tree down about 2 houses away. I could have been maybe on the edge of it, or like I said, my weather station is sheltered. The other parts of town, as I mentioned, had wind gusts over 60 miles an hour. So there's a reportable criteria threshold that most weather service offices use that's below severe criteria. And, you know, you never want to go below what the weather service recommended reportable criteria is, but that's why it's important to report even at that threshold that's below severe, but not below kind of what the weather service says, this is the minimum standards that you need to report. You know, there have been times, you know, I think a good example of a non-severe report is the example that I gave here in, I'll find the slide here in slide 7, where here's the West Brookfield Fire Department. Again, I don't want this to come across as that they don't know what they're doing or anything like that. It was dark. We have hills, we have trees in the way and whatever. My guess is that they saw a funnel cloud and it may have looked like it was on the ground. There was a circulation there that could have done that, but the damage, you know, we were actually giving reports of no significant damage, or, oh, you know, 20 minutes later, nope, we found some damage on this street. There's a single tree down, or there's a couple trees down, but there's no defined pattern. There's no defined path. That's probably a good example of a case where even we weren't even necessarily reporting criteria. We were actually saying, no, we're not seeing significant damage. First, it was we were seeing no damage, and then as we dug into it and dug into reports through the methods that we use, we were finding some spotty damage, but nothing that was indicative of a tornado. So I think if you're looking for a specific example, I think this was the one in terms of a scenario where even just reports saying, you know, we've checked out this area and there's no damage was actually important to the weather office, because meantime, this is being reported. Social media is going crazy. There's a tornado, you know, traversing the area. And like I said, we're not hearing the damage reports. So, or we did, but much later and much spottier. So we were actually saying, well, we're actually giving negative reports of, no, we're not seeing significant damage.
Well, I could give one. I was driving down the road. There was pea-sized hail, and I reported it. And 30 seconds later, they issued a severe thunderstorm warning. Because
Yes.
they were getting my report, and they were gathering other reports from other people and looking at the radar and said, hey, we're hearing people on the ground. We got to issue a warning here. And they did. So it was below the criteria, but they knew me and they trusted me because I had worked with them so much. And they issued the warning because it was an aggregate of all the situational awareness they were getting, and they just hit the button. And we had a severe thunderstorm warning because of it. So if you see something, say something.
Yep, and especially, you know, in Barry's case, that's an example of the severe criteria is 1 inch hail, but reportable criteria for most, if not all, weather service offices would be pea-size hail, and that's what it is at our office. So that's an example where a sub-severe report is important. And in Barry's case, they got that report. They're probably thinking, well, he's on the edge of the storm. Somebody under it's got to be seeing much bigger hail. We're going to put out a severe thunderstorm warning.
And because they're gathering information from multiple people.
That is true as well, and that may have also been a factor in Barry's case.
Another question: how did you get internet access from inside the forecast office, or did you?
So what we did was we actually have a MiFi hotspot that we use at our office. Our office was willing to get us a dedicated internet connection. So that wouldn't have been an issue, except that our office is located in an industrial park, and believe it or not, like Comcast and such weren't running lines in that industrial park. So there wasn't a good option for like a regular internet connection. So we stuck with a Verizon MiFi hotspot for our internet. So in our case, they were more than willing to do it. There just wasn't a good means to do it. And to get on the NOAA network, obviously it's a federal government network, so then there's security and stuff. They actually, at one point, I actually had a NOAA.gov address from, to be able to try to use some of their internet connectivity, but first of all, it's not all that fast, and also it's just a lot of restrictions. So we just stuck with the path of having our own outside internet connection. As I said, that was something the Weather Service was looking to even go after, but there wasn't a means to do it through like your typical broadband providers. So we stuck with a Verizon hotspot.
Okay. The question that I answered in the chat, but I think it's relevant for everybody to discuss, and you showed a lot of the pictures with a lot of these big trees, and they fall down complete, and their root balls come up out of the ground. And a lot of times these trees are blown over by the wind, but they normally wouldn't be blown over by strong winds, except the soil is damp and the roots just somehow get weak. So the whole thing gets blown over and the root ball gets pulled up out of the ground. That's why a lot of those pictures are so compelling. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly there are trees, I mean, we're not tree doctors, so there are certainly times where we'll have trees come down and they've got some sort of weakness to them or rot in the tree and so forth. And, and obviously sometimes it's the accumulation of events, past events where they didn't go down, and then the right situation happens with wind hits it just right, and then they come down. There's actually criteria that they'll look at around, especially when they're assessing tornadic damage, what kind of trees come down, how do they come down, the size of the root balls and what do they look like, and how does that affect the wind speed and intensity. So those are all factors in that. And there are certainly times, I've seen something where it'll be just a truly, dead tree that's very rotted and very weak, and I won't even report that in. But in the case that I showed, the tree there was a pretty, as far as I could tell, really healthy. And I can tell you that in 20 plus years of being on my street, I've had branches and smaller twigs come down. That's the first time we had, a sizable large tree come down specifically on my street. Certainly seen some big trees come down in other parts of the city during Irene, during Sandy, during a blizzard in 2013, a couple of specific wind events that happened. So I've definitely seen it in other cases, but never specifically on my street, other than smaller branches and a few large branches that have come down. So it's like anything else. There's definitely sometimes some weakness in some of the trees when they come down, but they use some metrics to kind of bound that when they're measuring wind speed intensity.
Okay. And we do use a lot of acronyms on here, and I just wanted to point out for those of you that live in the parts of the country that don't get hurricanes, NHC, we always call it NHC for some reason, stands for the National Hurricane Center. It's where all of the National Weather Service hurricane specialists live. And it's actually right next door to NWS Miami. It's in the same building right across the hall. And we maintain liaison with the National Hurricane Center, as well as the forecast office in Miami down here. But NHC is the National Hurricane Center. Just like in Oklahoma, I believe, is the Severe Storm Center. NHC is the Hurricane Center.
Yeah. SPC, that's the Storm Prediction Center.
Yes.
And I believe I saw a question about the Hurricane WatchNet. So I just put up their website here on the screen share. It's run by Bobby Graves, KB5HAV. Bobby's a great guy. And honestly, he's done a terrific job with this net in the last few years. And in spite of some health issues that would have likely kept many out of doing anything, he's a terrific guy. Has done some pretty amazing work. And this is their website. They are active on 14325 during hurricanes, on 20 meters, 7268 on 40 meters. And they've done many nets. As you can see, they've been around since 1965. So essentially, if I can do my math quick, that's 56 years. That's a extremely long time. And they're one of the longest running operations, or the longest running operation for hurricanes. The WX4NHC, the amateur radio station at the Hurricane Center, actually celebrated their 40th year of service last year. And sadly, because of COVID, we couldn't really celebrate that maybe as well as we could. But this year, it might still be tough, but I sure hope we can celebrate that in a big way once COVID and this pandemic is done, because that is, a remarkable work there as well. And then maybe when we hit the 60th anniversary of the Hurricane WatchNet, we can do the same. So some really good work here. They will activate within a couple 100 miles of a system getting landfall. They will activate a bit earlier in those cases in case of any marine reports that could come in over HF. So they'll activate a little bit earlier than, say, our net on the VoIP hurricane net side, or sometimes even the Hurricane WatchNet, depending upon what things are looking like for operations. So this is their website. They are also on Facebook. They post a lot of information ahead of hurricanes and so forth. So something for folks to check out.
Okay. Someone suggests for Skywarn Recognition Day to switch to simulated severe weather reports rather than fair weather reports, because he gets too many fair weather reports during real world events. So this would train people to not give real world fair weather reports if we did simulated severe weather reports for Skywarn Recognition Day. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we could consider that. I guess the only concern I'd have with the simulated reports is then you have to always state that it's a simulated report, because we have people that listen to us all the time, right? We do this in exercises where we always have to say this is a drill a few times around the report that we're giving that's simulated. And I would think, well, right, and they could still not hear it and whatever. So from an SRD perspective, if we've got people doing it, and it's really kind of geared to be a fun event, and the good thing about giving what's really actually happening, even though it's not criteria, is you're training folks and just reporting what's really happening there. Now I get that, you're not reporting criteria, so but it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. If we simulate that, then I think we'd have to say, this is a simulated report. I have trees down, or I have, 1-inch hail, and again, it's a simulated report, because otherwise people will hear it, either other amateurs monitoring or just folks that listen to us that may not be amateurs, and it could cause issues, and you'll probably have a lot of more folks on the air and for a longer period of time doing that during SRD. So I hear where that's going. I like the intent, but I'd be a little concerned that folks would be concerned there's severe weather happening everywhere in the country, because if they're just kind of tuning in and don't hear that it's simulated.
Right. Okay. And VoIP stands for Voice over Internet Protocol. And you want to explain for a few minutes exactly what the VoIP net is, because you'll be giving another presentation on that specifically.
Yeah, so I'll just go to our website quick. It's voipwx.net. It combines Echolink and IRLP into one system. Now, last year, through the efforts of our technical coordinator, Tony Langdon's VK3JED, we actually had brought in DMR and D-Star, and we always had All-Star even before Tony's efforts. and a bunch of the other modes into the network simultaneously. And we're going to see how things go time-wise here for this year, but we're going to try to have that maybe potentially right on our system directly, or if not, we'll continue with what we were doing through Tony's system. And we had our net meets on the star WX_talk Echolink conference node 7203 IRLP 9219 system. We have nets right now. They are monthly on the first Saturday of each month. We upscale that to weekly through the months of June through November. And we're always like folks to check in. We're always looking for net control operators for our regular net and also for net activations. So we'll have more on the actual kind of technology that's used and things of that nature, but it gives you an idea of how we just giving you a flavor of the net and what we do and some of the modes that are involved.
Okay. And also, can you do a quick synopsis of the Hurricane Watchnet?
All right, I actually think I hit that earlier. I saw that question, so that's back to the Hurricane Watchnet website here. I think I hit that one, so I think I'll stop there.
Okay. And do NWS forecasters look at personal weather station data, specifically weather stations on the Weather Underground?
They try to. But they're time slicing that with watching the radar, doing warnings and such. So that's why at our office in particular, we will look at those stations ourselves and submit those reports as well. And that's a big help to the forecasters, because if they're not looking at it, they could miss it, because generally there are times where there may only be 2 or 3 people in the weather office, and they're issuing their forecasts. They're trying to watch observations, they're looking at radar, they're looking at satellite imagery. So if we're doing some of that monitoring for them and such, it's been a big help for them to get that data from us. So at least at our office, that's how that's worked.
Yes, usually when there's severe weather, they are so busy looking at their computer data and everything else. A lot of times they don't have the time to gather a lot of this stuff. In the hands of the calm during a severe weather event in the Weather Service office, where they're calmly getting all the reports, and if there's any significant, they give them to the meteorologists, and the meteorologists love it, because then they can concentrate on their jobs, and we can help them.
Exactly. They can concentrate on the forecast and then just take the data we're giving them to adjust their forecasts accordingly.
Right. It's very, very important to them. That's why they love us so much. The Hawaii says that any hail is reported in Hawaii, but they're a special case because of their island. Okay, now let's see here from Wyoming. Have you heard about impact-based tags? They're rolling out in April, at least in the Rocky Mountain region. General, considerable, and destructive.
Yes, so that's a good point. And part of the reason that they're doing that is to allow for the wireless emergency alerts on phones to go off, when we hit the considerable threshold. So this will be good. Not all severe thunderstorm warnings are created equal. Some are marginal, and some are, they're almost, damage that could occur could be almost like you're being hit by a tornado, like the derecho events I mentioned here in New England, but also in Iowa. That occurred last year. So having that tag and being able to use the wireless emergency alert for those, in addition to tornadoes, is going to be a nice addition that I think is going to help save lives when we have those higher impact severe thunderstorms.
Okay.
If I can expand on that just a bit.
Go ahead.
That's David Kang. I was the one that posted that.
Okay.
Weather Service explained we get a severe thunderstorm out of 1 inch hail, which is a quarter, or 60-mile-an-hour winds and/or both. Then the next level up, considerable, is going to be 1.75 inches, or 1 3/4 inch, which is golf ball. And and or 70-mile-an-hour winds. And then the destructive is going to be baseball-sized hail, 2.75 inches, and over 80-mile-an-hour winds. We had 3 of those baseball-sized and larger go through one summer here just recently.
Okay.
That will help us a bunch, I think, in our forecast.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And we look forward to seeing more information about that.
Yeah, Tom's had his hand up for quite a while.
Okay, well, let's get finished with these questions. We're almost done, and then we'll get to the hands. Okay. Have you set up a number with Ham Shack Hotline to allow dialing from there? I'm not sure what that is.
Yes, so I know what Ham Shack Hotline is, and we have had connectivity direct with the Ham Shack Hotline, some of which was with Tony's technology that I mentioned with DMR and such. And when we haven't had that, through the efforts of our public info officer, Lloyd, KC5FM, he's also had it so that we've been able to specify a node for Ham Shack Hotline to dial into the system.
Okay. And also a note that VoIP can be hosted on gigabit mesh networks, I guess, in the disaster area, and you're going to have gigabit mesh networks set up. You can get into VoIP that way. So that would be a way to report stuff. Okay. And one more, and to add to the above question, do you have a profile configuration for the VoIP network to add that to the Cisco phone?
So yes, I think I don't think we can have a direct phone connection over VoIP. You can do it through like Ham Shack Hotline and stuff, but I don't think we have a method where you could do it directly from a VoIP phone.
Okay. And that's all the questions in chat, Dan. You want to go ahead and take the hands?
Yeah, Tom's had up for quite a while. Thanks for your patience there, Tom. Go ahead and give your question.
You need to unmute. There you go.
Yep, saw that. Sorry. I wanted to know if up there in Massachusetts anyway, are you making any use of access to the state's intercommunications between counties and so forth? It's something we've been able to use down here because several of our spotters, I'm the assistant coordinator for net management for Baltimore, Washington's forecast office. Several of our spotters have been trained on WebEOC, and that's in almost a universal use around here, and it's remotely accessible. So the spotter will put things on WebEOC, and then everybody in the state can see it, and the state emergency operations center can see it. And you know, at first when we started appearing there after our county asked us to, several other counties were going, "What is this stuff, and how are you getting out so fast?" And it was, they thought it was helpful. So I was wondering if you got it up there.
Yeah, so what we do there, so I have access to WebEOC, and actually sometimes I'm relaying what's in WebEOC to our weather service office. But also, what we do is we actually send emails out to a list that encompasses different emergency management agencies at the state level. It encompasses the various media outlets, non-governmental organizations like the Red Cross, Salvation Army, etc. And so we'll send it to that email list, and then it gets to our state warning point, and then the state warning point dispatchers will post our reports in a full summarized way into WebEOC. So we don't directly post it into WebEOC, or very rarely. I won't say we never do it, but it's very rare. They'll take the summary of reports that we have and then post that into WebEOC. And that's how the state level and within anyone using WebEOC at the city town level up into the state will get our reports. We'll send it to the state warning point over email, and then they'll post that information in WebEOC.
Plus, a lot of the coordinators and a lot of the government people participate in something called NWS chat. It's a very, very valuable thing for reporting severe weather.
Yeah, for NWS chat, to be clear, that is more for the leaders and the coordinators of Skywarn and the net controls of the various nets. So it's not open to all spotters and amateur operators, but it is open to the primary net controls and the coordinators of Skywarn, so that reports can be summarized and sent up through NWS chat. What we do at our office with NWS chat is we have our own Skywarn room that we'll share the reports in. We don't typically share them in the general chat room for the office. This way, if we have some higher end reports that we want to vet, but we want to let them know what's going on, we can give it directly to the Weather Service and, you know, vet it if we need to or whatever before it goes out to all the media outlets and everybody else. So, and yeah, I exactly, the different weather offices have different approaches. I can tell you at our office, we're probably one of the more stricter ones, but you know, for example, there's about 4 of us that have access, but we will be expanding that a little bit to, again, key people, key net controls, and key coordinators for given areas, so that we have that kind of pipeline to send information into NWS chat, specifically our Skywarn chat room.
Any other questions, Dan?
Anybody want to raise their hand, or let's just have, anybody got any comments out there and jump in right now if you would. I don't hear anybody. I don't see anybody. I will unmute my video so that I'm out there. Hi, everybody. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this, Rob. This has been a terrific presentation. You're muted, Rob.
Yeah, glad to be here. Glad to see everyone. And Stan, I'll give a shout out to you. Good to see you there in Ohio. I'm looking forward to getting back there person to person in 2022. I'm looking forward to that. And good to see everybody on. I hope this information is helpful. And I'm always around for questions. KD1CY@ARL.net will work. I also have KD1CY.rob@gmail.com if folks have questions, and really enjoy speaking to everybody about these things. And I know we'll be back in a few weeks' time to talk more specifically about the VoIP Hurricane Net and some of the technology that's used there. So great to see everybody. And I'm sorry to you, Dan and Barry, if I gave you guys a little heart attack. I was signing right on. I was just wrapping things, wrapping dinner up and just getting everything connected. The Zoom and whatever, I do this stuff all the time. So quick to, usually it works. Got it working all the time here. So it just pops right up and works. So
I got one more question.
Yes.
Tom wants to know, have you ever had a tornado or a funnel cloud within sight of the forecast office?
So the answer to that is yes, a couple of occasions. One, I was actually there for. It was a funnel cloud that it was high up. It wasn't really a threat. It was a little bit of a cold air funnel situation, but it was clearly a funnel cloud, and even one of the meteorologists mentioned it. That was one day. The other day, the other time, I was not at the Weather Service. It was a unforecasted tornado outbreak, I would call it by Massachusetts standards, in the month of October, which you would think was unprecedented. But when I went back through the tornado project records that date back to 1950, and I configure it to the coverage area of our weather office today, I could find another incident where we had 4 tornadoes in the month of October, which shocked me. I thought that was going to be some kind of record when we had 4 in October. This was back in 2018. So, you know, in that case, there was a tornado in Norton. I was thinking about making a break to get down to the Weather Service because it was unforecasted, and I was going to try to get there. But with the way things were going, I had to just do it remote, and I actually did it remote from work, which was challenging. And I have some methods to deal with that in the future, although now I work remote from home. So the ham station is literally next to the work computer. So that problem kind of solved itself. But there was a tornado in the town of Norton, not far from the weather office, where you could see the rotation, and I believe they could see the funnel from it from there. But I did not see that one myself. So there's a couple of cases there for you. I have seen hail at the office a few times. Back when we were in Taunton, which was right next door to the Norton office, I've seen hail there at the weather office. I've seen thunder snow at the weather office. So there's a few other things that we've seen. I actually saw tree damage at the weather office once too, in a high wind event in late October one year as well. And the funny thing about that was a tree came down, and I was there at the weather office for the winds, and I almost pulled into that spot to park, but I don't know, something made me not park there, and I parked in a different spot. And when I looked over as I was walking out of the office and saw the tree down there, it says, boy, something told me not to park there, which would have been good because it would have landed on my car. So so those are some things I've seen at the office weather-wise.
Kev, did you have a question? Unmute.
There we go. Thank you very much. Skywarn Ham in Honolulu is still tasked with getting the information into the Honolulu forecast office, even though we cannot go in and physically staff the ham station there. Consequently, we're operating from home in a worst case scenario, and we lose internet and we lose electrical power, commercial power, etc. How do we get from our backed up ham stations, HF and VHF, how do we get that information into the Honolulu Forecast Office facility itself? I heard about Ham Shack hotline, and I think that would be very interesting. But I can take this offline. We don't have to discuss it right now, but I need to know how to satisfy National Weather Service, even though we cannot step inside. Thank you.
Yeah, this is, and it's funny because, you know, I had this discussion with our local office today, because I'm the biggest scenario I worry about is if we get hit with a hurricane here in New England. You know, if we get even a category 1 could be a problem here, because we haven't had a hurricane in our area since 1991. So geez, 30 years now. And we've had strong tropical storms, but we have not had a landfalling hurricane. And I can tell you, working east to east remote was kind of brutal, because we get so much data coming in. And, you know, generally, if we were at the weather office, I'd have at least 1 or 2 other people, and we divide up the task. And we try to do that virtually, and it's hard. It ends up kind of falling to me generally. And then I'm going to be working with the team this year to how do we spread that out some more to make that work better. And I think there's definitely ways we could do that. In terms of the weather service connection piece, I mean, if worse comes to worse and we really can't get in there, because I press on our office that if we have a landfalling hurricane, and when I say landfalling hurricane, I mean, we've had some threats. We've had Hurricane Earl, and it skirted the area. But if we have a direct hit, you know, if we, you know, I want to push to really get us in there. If we can't get us in there, we do have a couple of forecasters that are hams at our office, and they're not super familiar with all the modes of operation. But even if I can get them on a specific 2-meter repeater and a specific simplex frequency to make sure I can get to them, so that if chat goes down, we have another way to get to the office that's not dependent on the phone or on VoIP or internet or anything. I think that's how I would try to handle that. And if you have no other hams that are forecasters at your office, you know, I mean, you know, this gets into all the rules, and you know, it's not necessarily emergency traffic per se and such, but at the same time, I highly doubt the FCC is going to say if a forecaster gets on the air to talk to you, to gather reports, and all other communication means are down, I really doubt anybody's going to say anything. So it might be something that you can work with the office, or potentially say, look, I'd really like to see you get a couple of people on your staff licensed for this scenario because we can't get in there. You know, it might actually be a motivation for them to get licensed. We do have a handful of forecasters that are licensed at our office. They can get on the air, but they need but like even our warning coordination meteorologist, he needed some instruction from me ahead of time even to get on for SRD. But we got him on a couple frequencies and it worked. And it was actually, to me, a good test so that if we can't get into the office, I can get him to get on there, or at least I can get him on there, and then, you know, someone else can pick up the mic and talk. If he's in the room, it's third-party traffic, you know, with the station call. And as I said, there are, I think one is retired now, so I think we're at 3 people on the staff at our office that are hams. So I would work something with them so that, you know, here are a couple designated frequencies to come to, and have a few of us that are like the lead coordinators funnel them the information. So don't have them running around to a lot of frequencies. Pick like a repeater and a simplex frequency and focus them to turn the radio on, go to those frequencies and get the reports that way. That's how we'll probably try to do it at our office if we can't get in there for something that knocks out chat and other ways to get to them. So I know it was probably a long-winded answer, but that's the answer.
No, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much. The other thing I'm considering is a local ham that is about 2 blocks away for very significant reports, severe weather reports. Send it by a runner. Take it down, whether it's the Big Island reporting into Honolulu or whatever. Take the report and then having a kid run it in, posting it, then they can step outside, get it, and there's no human contact.
Yeah. Yep.
You know? Okay. So thank you.
Yep.
Tom, you had a hand up?
Yes, sir. First, Rob, I think you'll enjoy this a lot. I was actually on duty at the weather desk at LWX out there by the Dulles Airport. And the office warned itself about the tornado. And then they said, okay, tornado, we're shifting to Mount Holly. And so I knew what I was supposed to do. I ran out in the hall and I'm hauling hell-bent for leather down to the reinforced room that the Weather Service spent so much money. And I look behind me and there's no forecasters coming. So I wander back up the hall, and where are they? They're all out on the lawn with cameras photographing the damn tornado. They didn't need that hardened room. They needed more cameras.
I believe that. You know, one time we had a close call at the office, and it was in the middle of the night, and this was in 2000. So you spurred my thoughts on another situation. We didn't see a funnel cloud or anything, but the winds were very strong. Half the staff went in the bathroom, with the reinforced room, and the other half were out the window watching it. And I recall that, you know, not far away from our office was golf ball size hail. It was about 2 miles away from the office. So, you know, it was quite a interesting, you know, that was an interesting one. And that was a storm that had started out in southeast New York and traversed its way all the way in through to southeast Mass, and it was a late night scenario. I remember I was up all night for that one at the weather office.
As an experiment, one of our hams for a predicted heavy weather event took his truck up to the Weather Service office and did what I was speaking about in the pre-discussion, which was he put a ring down phone near the back door, and a forecaster reached out and picked it up because he'd already cleaned it and everything and walked away. And the ring down phone allowed him to take the reports in his truck. And when he had one that was significant, he could pick up the ring down phone, they'd answer it inside, and he says, here's what I've got. But that was just an experiment to see that it would work. It wasn't an actual event. But just an idea for Kev there to consider. You can have somebody go up there in a vehicle that can, as long as it's safe to do so, and put it, and the module for a ring down phone is like $25, you know, and a pair of cheap phones. That's all you need.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Rob, before we let you go, I want to make sure, would you, when you're done with the presentation here, will you email me a copy of your presentation so I can get it on our site for people
Sure.
to get? Appreciate that very much. And I'll put one more call out there for questions. Any answers? Any comments? This has really been a good presentation. I appreciate you taking the time to do it.
No, my pleasure, and good to see everybody. And again, thanks to everybody for what they do, and we'll see what 2021 brings. And let's hope we can get this pandemic behind us and start seeing each other in person again in 2022 at Hamvention and Hamcation and all those kind of events.
It'd be like, we need to get back to that. Although we've learned a new technique here, I think it's going to be a mixture of things going on.
Oh, it definitely will be, and it'll be good. I think it'll be good to be back in person, but we'll still have these things. I think it'll be a great way to stay in touch going forward.
Okay, and along that line, staying in touch, after I close this meeting out, I leave the session open, so all you have to do is log back in, and you guys can meet just like after a Ham Club meeting, whatever, and chit chat amongst yourselves. Unless there's something else, I will close it out.
Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Rob.
73s.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. 7-3.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, 73s, everyone.